Washington, D.C., just as the rest of the country. And so, the Republican Party stands on the floor of the House today. We are about jobs. We're about reducing wasteful Washington spending, and we're going to stand for common sense. We reserve our time.
Gentleman reserves. Gentlelady from New York.
I'd like to yield myself 1 minute before I yield 4 minutes to Mr. Cummings, if I may, just simply to say that one of the things that we're hearing today is that these bills are unneeded. Let me just quote a little bit from the Dallas Morning News. Home prices down 3.6% in December. 40% of home sales in North Texas foreclosed and short sale homes. Dallas housing analyst said no doubt the foreclosures continue to have an impact on the market. They're going to receive $135 million through insistence unless all these bills die. And I would like to ask unanimous consent to insert the full text of the Dallas Morning News to the record. I obviously mentioned Dallas because that is the district of my colleague.
Without objection.
And I wanted to point out that there's pain at home. I now yield 4 minutes to the gentleman from Maryland, Mr. Cummings.
Gentleman from Maryland.
Thank you very much. I thank the gentlelady for yielding. And as I sat on the floor this morning and listened to my esteemed colleague on the other side, I must tell you that I am a bit upset. For he talks about common sense and balance. These are two words, the common sense and balance is something that I talk about all the time. As the ranking member of the Government Reform and Oversight Committee, we talk about common sense. We talk about balance. And part of common sense and balance is trying to make sure our children are educated. Part of common sense and balance is making sure that my neighbor who just died of cancer, and I would have to go into my pocket over and over again to give him the money to supplement his chemo. Common sense and balance. Common sense and balance is trying to make sure that people have jobs. When I appear at my jobs fair in a few weeks, it'll be just like last year, where 9,000 people will show up at 6 o'clock in the morning and circles around buildings. Common sense and balance, so that the students at Morgan State University will not have their Pell Grants reduced by $800 when they're struggling right now. So they're working, trying to get a job if they can get one, and working, doing the best that they can, and it is their turn. Common sense and balance said we don't cut them off. And so as I listen, you know, I think about all of this, and I'm trying to figure out, how does the American people make common sense and get common sense and balance out of what is going on in this House? Now, with regard to, I heard my friend talk about regulations. Just this morning in a hearing that we had in government reform, we had all of these execs from corporations come and talk about how they wanted to get rid of, quote, job-killing regulations. Every one of them agreed with me that regulations are important because they protect the health, welfare, and safety of people. And as I told them this morning, I said to them, and I was very clear, I said, when I was a young student, a high school student, and I would go to Bethlehem Steel every summer to work, when I blew my nose after being there for an hour, when the mucus came out, it was black. It was regulations that addressed that. And there were men who had been there 40 years who were breathing that every day, 8 hours a day. And many of them died early. Common sense and regulate, common sense and balance. Common sense and balance, and I've said it to my constituents, and I said it to them at a town hall meeting this week. I said, I wish the Congress would address issues like we deal with our family problems. If you got a family problem and you've got a daughter or a son who wants to go to college, maybe go to an expensive college, you don't say to them, you're not going to go to college. You find a way to, cut back on some things. You don't cut back on everything. You don't say to that child, you cannot go to school because it's now their turn. You just don't turn your back on them. You don't cut off people's jobs and their training when they're trying to be retrained, when that father who's lost his job is trying to be retrained. I asked for additional three minutes. Can we get it?
May I inquire how much time is left?
You have 11 and a half minutes.
Absolutely. I yield 3 more minutes to the gentleman.
Gentleman from
And
Maryland.
so, common sense and balance. I rise today in strong opposition to this rule, which provides for the consideration of H.R. 836, a bill that seeks to kill the homeowner loan assistance program. This program was created to provide limited, low-cost loans to enable borrowers who are unemployed through no fault of their own, or who face debilitating medical costs. And by the way, a lot of people say that they will never face these medical costs. Well, all of us are the walking wounded. All of us will face difficult problems. The question is, will America be the America that it has always been? We do not get our authority by might. We get it by the way we treat each other. And so these folks are going through some difficult times. These are the same people that this loan program is about. These are the same people that have shown up time after time sitting in the front row of something I call my foreclosure prevention program, with tears running down their faces. Many of them have never missed a mortgage payment, have worked hard every day, and have done everything that was required of them. These are our American neighbors. They are the American neighbors that sit in Ohio. They're the ones who are in California and New York. Those are our neighbors, and they are in the time of need. And we're talking about a $1 billion program to try to help people as they're struggling, trying to get up after an economy, by the way, where regulation failed them. They find themselves in these difficulties in many instances because people were not regulating properly. And yes, it upsets me, because I go back to a district every night, 40 miles away from here, where people are saddened, and there are areas in my district where you probably got 25% unemployment. So I care about the jobs. They're important to me. I care about people living and staying in their homes. And so if anything was said by the November elections, it was about, we need to sit down and get together and work through people's problems like any family would address family problems. And we must be about the business of making sure that we do those things to have a future. I don't want any child in America, I don't care whether he's in your district, Mr. Speaker, or anybody else's district. I want every child to have an opportunity. I want the same opportunities for your children, Mr. Speaker, that I want for mine. With that, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Texas.
Mr. Speaker, at this time, I'd like to inform the gentlewoman from New York that I have no additional speakers, and if she is done, we could let her go ahead and offer her close, and then I will finish it out.
I have someone I understand is on the way, but she's not here. And since you are ready to close, then
I'm sorry, is the gentlewoman wishing to proceed at this time on her close, or should I reserve my time?
I'm not going to ask to wait until she arrives.
I'll reserve my time.
No, I want to yield back the balance of my time.
And lady yields back. Gentleman from Texas.
Okay, the gentlewoman has now yielded back her time, and thank you very much. Mr. Speaker, the facts of this case state very clearly that this nation is being overrun. It's being overrun by too much taxing, too much borrowing, too much spending. Just last month, we hit a record deficit, $223 billion. This is unacceptable. The status quo of where we're moving is not acceptable. With the debt looming at over $14 trillion and unemployment, as we have heard the stories, hovering about across the country right at 9% and much higher in many areas of the country, including congressional districts that are hurt even more. And I understand this because those who first lose their job many times are disabled people. And I understand disabled people and their plight that they have also. And it is sad, and it hurts us as members of Congress, and it hurts the American people. American people ask Congress to rein in the spending, to do something about jobs, and that's what we're doing. We're not making excuses. We're getting the job accomplished. Eliminating this program will save taxpayers hundreds of millions of dollars. By gaining control of government spending and eliminating wasteful Washington government spending, these handouts that the private sector could utilize and gain confidence in the economy and start doing it itself, we could begin investing in jobs and a brighter economic future. I applaud my friend from Texas, the gentleman, Mr. Hensarling, for bringing this legislation, and to the chairman of the Rules Committee, the young chairman, David Dreyer, the favorite son from California, San Dimas, California, who David comes here and so ably runs our Rules Committee for us. We thank them for providing an open and transparent process. I encourage a yes vote on the rule, and Mr. Speaker, I yield back the balance of my time and move the previous question on the resolution.
Without objection, the previous question is ordered. The question is on adoption of the resolution. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed, no. The opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The ayes have it. The resolution is agreed to, and without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid upon the table. For what purpose does the gentleman from Utah rise?
Mr. Speaker, by direction of the Committee on Rules, I call up House Resolution 150 and ask for its immediate consideration.
Clerk will report the resolution.
House Calendar Number 14, House Resolution 150, resolved that at any time after the adoption of this resolution, the Speaker may, pursuant to Clause 2B of Rule 18, declare the House resolved into the Committee of the Whole House on the State of the Union for consideration of the bill, H.R. 830, to rescind the unobligated funding for the FHA refinance program and to terminate the program. The first reading of the bill shall be dispensed with. All points of order against consideration of the bill are waived. General debate shall be confined to the bill and shall not exceed 1 hour, equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking minority member of the Committee on Financial Services. After general debate, the bill shall be considered for amendment under the 5-minute rule. It shall be in order to consider as an original bill for the purpose of amendment under the 5-minute rule, the amendment in the nature of a substitute recommended by the Committee on Financial Services now printed in the bill. Each section of the committee amendment in the nature of a substitute shall be considered as read. All points of order against the committee amendment in the nature of a substitute are waived. No amendment to the committee amendment in the nature of a substitute shall be in order except those received for printing in the portion of the congressional record designated for that purpose in Clause 8 of Rule 18 in a daily issue dated March 9, 2011 or earlier, and accept pro forma amendments for the purpose of debate. Each amendment so received may be offered only by the member who caused it to be printed or a designee, and shall be considered as read if printed. At the conclusion of consideration of the bill for amendment, the committee shall rise and report the bill to the House with such amendments as may have been adopted. Any member may demand a separate vote in the House on any amendment adopted in the Committee of the Whole to the bill or to the committee amendment in the nature of a substitute. The previous question shall be considered as ordered on the bill and amendments thereto to final passage without intervening motion except one motion to recommit with or without instructions.
The gentleman from Utah is recognized for 1 hour.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. For purposes of debate only, I yield the customary 30 minutes to the gentleman from Colorado, Mr. Polis, pending which I yield myself such time as I may consume. During consideration of this resolution, all time yielded is for the purpose of debate only. This resolution provides for a modified open rule for the consideration of H.R. 830, the FHA Finance Program Termination Act. provides for 1 hour of general debate equally divided and controlled by the chairman and ranking minority member of the Committee on Financial Services, and for consideration of any amendments proposed by members that conform to the House rule and which were pre-printed in the congressional record no later than March 9th of yesterday. Mr. Speaker, I'm also pleased to stand before the House today and support this rule and the underlying legislation, H.R. 830, the FHA Refinance Program Termination Act. I appreciate the hard work of the distinguished chairman of the Financial Services Committee, Mr. Baucus, as well as the hard work of the bill's chief sponsor, the gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Dold, in creating this piece of legislation which will help this Congress to continue to take concrete steps to rein in the out-of-control federal mandatory spending. The FHA refinance program was originally promoted by the current administration as a way to bail out the so-called underwater borrowers who, for whatever reason, found themselves in over their heads in personal and mortgage debt and unable to pay their mortgages. The 110th Congress passed TARP, which was enabling legislation for this new program, and thereby effectively allowed lenders to transfer high-risk mortgages through the FHA onto the backs of taxpayers in the case of a likely default. The $8 billion in TARP funds was originally identified for this new expansive program. While no one likes to see homeowners in distress and at risk of losing their homes, the fact of the matter is that this new program, no matter how well-intentioned, is inexpensive and has also proven to be a woefully ineffective program at its best. Originally, it was asserted by the administration this program would allow up to 1.5 million homeowners, or as some reports in the papers said, 3 to 4 million distressed homeowners, to obtain more favorable mortgage terms, all guaranteed by U.S. taxpayers in case of ultimate default. However, Mr. Speaker, there are several problems with this new mortgage bailout program. First, in some and perhaps in many cases, this program would subsidize irresponsible lenders and borrowers and insulate them from the consequences of bad choices and, in some cases, intentionally speculative financial choices that were made during the housing boom, and thus shifting the economic impact of those bad choices and decisions onto the backs of responsible homeowners and the taxpayers. This is troubling, for this should not be the role of the federal government to pick winners and losers in the marketplace. While home ownership in this country is certainly to be encouraged, this program is exactly the wrong way to go about it. The program basically tells the lender, don't worry, it's okay. So what if you knowingly encouraged or lent more than you knew the borrower could afford? We'll bail you out of your predicament so you don't have to feel any of the economic consequences of your actions. The program tells borrowers, so what if you took out the maximum loan and got the most expensive house that you could buy, even though you knew it was highly unlikely you'd be able to afford those payments in the future? We'll bail you out too and insulate you from the consequences of actions as well. And we'll shift all the costs and send the bills via the FHA onto the backs of the already overburdened taxpayers. That's apparently where the buck stops in this program. It stops on the back of already burdened taxpayers and a nation that itself is $14 trillion underwater in a crushing and unprecedented debt. Second, it appears that in spite of the urgent housing crisis, this so-called emergency program to bail out underwater mortgages hasn't actually helped anyone. According to the Department of Housing and Urban Development statistics, as of February 3rd, only 44 refinancing applications have been processed by the agency. That's 44 homeowners out of the potentially 3 to 4 million as originally asserted by the program sponsors. Mr. Lamar Woolley, a spokesman for HUD, was quoted in the National Journal Daily article last week as saying the department has not yet spent any of the money of the FHA program. Even the Special Inspector General for the Troubled Assets Relief Program testified before the Financial Services Committee last week that it was somewhat shameful how the administration has mishandled this program. And those are his words, not mine. And finally, the FHA Administrator, Stevens, also testified before that committee last week that these new loans may perform worse than refinance loans that were not previously underwater. In other words, Mr. Stevens' statement indicates that many new loans made under this program for underwater loans are far less likely to be repaid, which will weaken the FHA Mortgage Loan Insurance Fund, hurting other taxpayers and other potential homeowners and exposing them to an even higher risk. As a result, this program privatizes profits, socializes losses, and at its foundation, this program appears to be built on a misguided economic principle of income redistributing, leaving other taxpayers and future generations to hold the bag with interest. In testimony before the Rules Committee yesterday, it was mentioned that the private sector, the private mortgage industry, has on its own and without any interference by the federal government worked with troubled borrowers to refinance over 3 million loans in order to keep these homes from foreclosure. So there clearly appears to be a far more effective private sector solution to this crisis than to inject a layer of federal government regulation and spending through this expensive program. We must have the courage to admit when a program is ineffective or too expensive or based on wrong-headed principles of subsidizing personal greed and irresponsibility, that with our nation itself underwater with monstrous debt passage of this bill, to terminate this expensive and ineffective program is a step in the right direction. It's a good and fair rule. It opens it up for anyone to have access to this bill, and a good underlying bill, and I urge their adoption. Mr. Speaker, I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserved. Gentleman from Colorado.
Thank the gentleman from Utah for the time. Mr. Speaker, now more than ever, it's critical that we focus our efforts on creating jobs, continuing to stabilize our economy and the housing market. And I'm happy to say there's some good news on that front. Just last month, Mr. Speaker, it was reported that we added 192,000 jobs and that unemployment dipped below 9% for the first time in almost 2 years. We're talking about private sector jobs. This was due in part to the recovery efforts that were passed in the 111th Congress and signed by the President. Now, however, instead of building on the successes of the previous Congress and introducing legislation to continue this economic growth, my colleagues are seeking to pull the plug and return us to policies that got us into this economic mess. Instead of talking about on the floor of the House creating jobs, Republican leadership is focused on repealing the Patient Bill of Rights, passing H.R. 1, a spending bill that Chairman Bernanke stated will kill 200,000 jobs over the next 2 years, and now removing critical support for homeowners who are struggling to pay their mortgages in this tough economic time. H.R. 830 is more of the same. At a time when housing markets are beginning to show signs of life, signs of recovery, my Republican colleagues want to eliminate programs that keep families in their home and protect communities from the crippling consequences of foreclosures. Democrats want to empower homeowners to get their debts under control, not undermine our economic recovery for political gain. It's critical to preserve the American dream by keeping families in their home and out of shelters and unemployment lines and preserving the integrity of neighborhoods that suffer when homes are foreclosed upon. Repealing the FHA refinance program would empower collection agencies and municipal eviction squads, rather than empower hardworking American families who are suffering in this difficult economic climate or victims of lenders that created financial products through the housing crisis that led to reckless lending. The bill we have before us today would be harmful to middle-class families who are struggling to stay in their homes. Middle-class Americans hurt by this bill are exactly the people we should be protecting in this Congress as we start to build a stronger and more stable economic future for our country. Instead, this House has raised their taxes with the passage of H.R. 4, and now the Republicans are threatening to remove working families from their homes. Mr. Speaker, we do all agree that this nation needs to get its fiscal house in order and resolve the housing crisis. But this bill, an outright repeal of the FHA program, is not the right approach. A strong rebound in the housing market is critical to our economic recovery, creating jobs, and ensuring that our banks remain stable. A good indication of the housing market is the amount of delinquencies, or the number of mortgages that are at least 30 days late on their payment. According to Jay Brinkman, the chief economist for the Mortgage Bankers Association, the latest delinquency numbers represent significant across-the-board decreases in mortgage delinquency rates in the U.S. More importantly, loans that were past due by 90 days or more fell 28%. It's clear that through programs like the FHA short refinance option, which the Republicans are trying to eliminate, we have begun to stabilize the housing markets while helping Americans pay their mortgages and stay in their homes. These numbers coincide with signs of a recovery in the job market, and now is not the time to abandon the program. The FHA refinance program allows people who have mortgages that are worth more than their homes to refinance to a more affordable FHA-insured mortgage. This program allows lenders to write down at least 10% of the outstanding principal to help bring monthly payments down to affordable levels. According to CoreLogic, in December of last year, about 22.5% of all residential properties with mortgages were underwater. We're no stranger to that in Colorado. Many homes in Adams County and Boulder County are underwater. These distressed mortgages pose a threat to our economy and the integrity of the banking system. We can't risk another housing crisis and banking crisis by removing programs that help keep families in their home and keep the homes out of foreclosure. My friends on the other side of the aisle will argue that this program has fallen short of its original goals. I agree that this program is not perfect. Instead of scrapping it entirely, we should work to strengthen on it, build on success, and figure out how best to resolve the housing crisis that this nation faces. We need to mend it, not end it. Until just recently, many homeowners weren't even able to partake in this program. Borrowers had difficulty finding banks that had the capacity to refinance under the stringent guidelines of this program. But recently, we've had some good news. Two major banks who underwrite many loans in Colorado, Wells Fargo and Ally Financial, announced pilot projects that would allow underwater borrowers to refinance under this FHA program. By adding these two giants to the mix, the FHA refinance program will begin to grow and prosper while it continues to add more banks and increase accessibility. Terminating this project now would result in many families losing their homes and would be a tragic mistake. Mr. Speaker, banks support this program. Homeowners support this program. It's critical that we all allow this program the chance to succeed rather than make arbitrary budget cuts, rather than help struggling families. This program does not bail out individuals who made mistakes, who made poor decisions, who bought houses they couldn't afford or are looking for a way out of foreclosure. It's not a program to protect vacation homes or mega mansions. It's not a free line of credit for anybody. This program is a helping hand to the many hardworking Americans who are in a difficult spot. They're individuals with good credit scores who can help themselves and the banks who hold their mortgages by participating in this program. In my home state of Colorado, almost 20% of all homes are in negative equity. This means about 220,000 families in Colorado are stuck with mortgages that are worth more than their homes. According to the New York Times, ending this program would squander an important chance to prevent foreclosures. In addition, Mark Fleming, the chief economist with CoreLogic, stated, negative equity is a primary factor holding back the housing market and broader economy, end quote. With so many families underwater, it would be irresponsible of us to eliminate this program and unnecessarily put more Americans at risk of foreclosure. Mr. Speaker, to date, not a single mortgage that has been refinanced through this program has gone into default. Let me repeat that. Not a single mortgage that has been refinanced through this program has gone into default. The majority of costs associated with this program occur if these FHA-insured mortgages go into default. Now, there's no way my friends on the other side of the aisle can call this a waste of taxpayer money because it's yet to spend $1 of the funds that was allocated. In fact, the Dodd-Frank Wall Street Reform and Consumer Protection Act that Congress passed and the President signed last year requires all unused funds from the program to be returned to the Treasury. By strengthening this program, improving this program, we can continue to keep Americans in their home at a minimal cost to taxpayers. Mr. Speaker, we must improve this program so we can keep families from defaulting, strengthen the economy, save taxpayer dollars, and stabilize the real estate market. I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from Utah.
Mr. Speaker, before I yield time, I ask unanimous consent that all members may have 5 legislative days in which to revise and extend their remarks.
Without objection.
Thank you. With this, I am very pleased to yield as much time as you may consume to the sponsor of this bill, who has found a program that flat out doesn't work. The gentleman from Illinois is Mr. Dole.
Gentleman from Illinois.
I thank the gentleman from Utah for yielding, and I certainly want to take this opportunity to outline what this program has been. This is undeniable that this program has been what anybody that looks at it can say is a failure. It doesn't work for the homeowners. It doesn't work for hard-paying or hard-working American families that are paying taxes, and it doesn't work for future generations, children and grandchildren that will certainly be burdened with an enormous debt that the government continues to heap on them. If I can just go back, as a small business owner, I employ just under 100 people. For me, that's 100 families. And I do stay awake at night trying to make sure that these families have the opportunity to put food on the table, provide an education for their children. But one of the things I do and have learned in business is the fact that you have to recognize when something's not working. This is an instance of something not working in our government. Let's just go back down to just the raw basics. Let's look at the facts of this program. While well-intentioned, the program facts are simply these. We have obligated $8.12 billion out of TARP funds. Obligated $8.12 billion. We have dispersed $50 million. $50 million has been dispersed. And yet, in the downturn, we have seen that what should have been, what, 1.5 million is what the administration is saying, the number of homeowners that are coming into this program. We've seen 245 applicants in the last 6 months. 245 applicants, and out of the 50 million dispersed, we have received 44 loan modifications. 44. Just doing the quick back-of-the-envelope math. $1.1 million per refinanced loan. The average loan is $300,000. Now, I have to tell you, for the American public, for future generations, that is not a good use of the American taxpayer dollar. We can and must do better. There is no question that there are good and laudable programs out there that we need to be financing. This is not one of them. Let me just say again that this doesn't work for the homeowners themselves. Why is there so few in a downturn? And I would argue because many of the homeowners recognize that this is not a program that they want to be involved with. You can't be engaged in this program if you, first of all, have any equity in your home. You can't be engaged in this program if you're delinquent on any one of your mortgage payments. There are a whole litany of things that prevent you from getting into this program. But if you do get into this program, your credit will be decimated for years to come. The average credit score, according to the experts, is 711. Well, it won't be 711 for long, as soon as they take this and get access to this program. The question is will it reduce your monthly payments? Well, after going through this, the homeowners actually have to pay the closing costs. Then they have to actually purchase private homeowners insurance, the mortgage insurance. The chances of them actually reducing their payments is actually not that great. So they're going to go through the hoops and the pains to not reduce their monthly payment. Again, this is not a win for the homeowners. It's also not a win for the tax-paying American families. $8.12 billion obligated. We have to go in and look this evening. Go in when you tuck your children in bed this evening and ask yourself, are we doing this? Is this the best interest of the future generations? Is this the best use of our taxpayer funds? We have to be truthful with the American taxpayer. We have to be truthful with the American people. That's what you sent us here to Washington to do, is to look you in the eye and be truthful with you. This is a program that doesn't work. That doesn't mean that we don't want to help out homeowners. We do not want to be wasteful with your tax dollars. We have to go back to the drawing board because right now this absolutely is a program that by all accounts has failed. So when you look at your children and grandchildren, know that we can and must do better. I think that we have an obligation when we look at the American family. Is this the best use of our resources? Is this the best that we can do? I don't believe that it is. As a small business owner, we make mistakes. We're going to make mistakes here in this Congress. How will we be judged? I hope we're judged on the fact that we can admit when we've made mistakes and try to then go back to the drawing board. I urge my colleagues on both sides of the aisle to take a strong look at this, to know when something is not working. We have refinanced literally millions of mortgages in other vehicles. Out of the 6 months that this has been alive, 44 mortgages at the tune of about $1.1 million for the dispersed funds into this FHA refinance program. So with that, I urge my colleagues to certainly support 830 and support this rule, and I yield back to the gentleman.
Gentleman from Colorado.
Thank you. I'd like to yield 3 minutes to the gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. Andrews.
Gentleman from New Jersey. Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank my friend from Colorado for yielding. Mr. Speaker, I would venture to say that if we went to a mall this afternoon in our country, or a diner, or some other place where people gather, maybe people waiting outside of school to pick up their kids, and said, what would you like to see Congress work on this week? I think most of them would say, why don't you work together to create an environment where small businesses and entrepreneurs can create jobs? Because there are 15 million unemployed Americans, and we need to put people back to work. Others of them might say, I'm concerned about educating my children. I have college-age children, and I'm looking at the cost of paying for a college education, and I'm extremely concerned I'm not going to be able to educate my kids. Others might say, I'm worried about my parents. My mom or my dad live with me, and their prescription costs are going through the roof, and it's a major problem for them. I'm worried about health care for my parents. I'm sure there are some, there are many, who would say that they're worried about wasteful government spending, that they do want to see this government not waste their hard-earned money. And I guess there are some who would say there's this mortgage program that's been running for a couple of months, and I really think that you should do something about that and get rid of it. There are some, and there'll be debate about the merits of doing that. But if we look at the record of this majority, 10 weeks of hearing those concerns, and they are 0 for 10. 10 weeks, not one bill about jobs, not one idea about jobs, not one effort to create an environment that small businesses and entrepreneurs would thrive in, and this is week number 10, and not a word. Earlier in the last debate, the gentleman from Texas said that the Republican job plan was to repeal the health care bill. That was their jobs plan. Well, that ignores the reality that since the health care plan was enacted, about 1.4 million jobs have been added to the economy, almost 250,000 of them in health care itself. So that's their jobs plan. Their education plan is to go to a woman who's working part-time, raising children and trying to go to school, and reduce her college scholarship by $845, so that she probably has to either stretch the years in which she's in school or throw in the towel on her education altogether. Their education plan is to take 10,000 reading teachers out of America's classrooms, 7,000 special education teachers out of America's classrooms. That doesn't sound like a very educated education plan to me. And frankly, as far as the price of health care is concerned, if they succeed in repealing the health care bill, I would ask for one more minute. If they, I thank the gentleman. If they succeed in repealing the health care bill, the price of prescription drugs will go up for people's moms and dads, not down. Jobs, 10 weeks, no plan. The cost of education, 10 weeks, a bad plan that raises the price of education. The prescription drug problem for seniors, 10 weeks, a bad plan that raises the price of prescriptions for seniors. A lot of Americans would probably say they don't like the idea of paying $4 or $5 a gallon for gasoline at the gas pump. No plan from the majority. So we'll have a debate on the merits of this bill, but with all due respect, Mr. Speaker, this is the wrong bill at the wrong time. The American people want us to work together to create jobs, make education affordable, make health care affordable, particularly for senior citizens in this country. The majority is 0 for 10. Let's make this week the one that we break their losing streak and work for the people of our country. I yield back.
Gentleman from Utah.
Reserve.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from Colorado.
Thank you. It's my honor to yield 2 minutes to the gentlewoman from New York, Ms. Maloney.
Gentlelady from New York.
I thank the gentleman for yielding, and I rise in opposition to the rule and in support of the FHA refinancing bill that is one of 4 bills that will be on the floor coming out of the Financial Services Committee on which I serve, that is terminating programs that will literally help people stay in their homes and help in the economic recovery. My Republican colleagues are proposing to terminate these programs, but they are not putting forward any alternative to help these people stay in their homes. And there are nearly 11 million homes that are underwater now, meaning that the value of the home is less than the loan the homeowner has taken out to pay for it. And 7 million homes have been foreclosed on so far, and another 3 million are expected to be foreclosed on between 2012. And this vote will be on continuing the refinancing of FHA loans that will keep people in these homes, keep these homes filled so that they're not eyesores or pulling down the economy in certain areas. Last week, Citibank, Wells, and GMAC voluntarily came forward and said they intend to participate in this program. It's a voluntary program. And these are three of the largest mortgage companies in the country. And their participation will certainly broaden the reach to help more people. The program allows borrowers to write down at least 10% to reduce the debt burden. Then standard FHA loan terms will apply. As with all FHA-insured loans, the property must be the homeowner's primary residence, and the borrower must meet the FHA's full documentation, and they must be current on their mortgage. With declining home values, borrowers are caught in mortgages that can no longer afford because their rates have reset or because their interest-only payments have not allowed them to grow any equity in their homes. And they are making their payments but barely. This is an important program. Thank you so much. States across the country have this challenge, and almost 11 mortgages are underwater, or 22% of all outstanding mortgages. And by passing this bill, we are saying that we have no solutions for these homeowners. It is not good for the homeowner, not good for the economy, and certainly not good for our country. President Obama has issued a statement that he will oppose the termination of this program and indicating that he will veto it when it gets to his desk. But I urge my colleagues to join me in vetoing this rule and vetoing this underlying bill to help our homeowners stay in their homes. Thank you.
Gentleman from Utah.
I appreciate listening to the gentlewoman's discussion of the bill actually at hand, and I reserve.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from Colorado.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. At the end of this debate, I'll ask my colleagues to vote no on the previous question so that I can offer an amendment to bring up H.R. 964, the Federal Price Gouging Prevention Act. I'm honored to yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from New York, Mr. Bishop.
Gentleman from New York.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the gentleman for yielding. I rise in opposition to the previous question and against the rule. Not only is the majority passing up another opportunity to finally put forward a bill to create jobs, they are using the underlying bills to make it even tougher on American families, in particular tougher on middle-class homeowners. Further, it is clear, as Mr. Andrews suggested, that Republicans have no plan for rapidly soaring gas prices, another threat to middle-class families and to our economy. The Department of Energy forecasts gas prices could spike to a national average of more than $4 a gallon for regular this summer. That's about 50 cents higher per gallon than Tuesday's national average of $3.50. In my district of eastern Long Island, regular unleaded has already surged by 34 cents in the last month alone and now averages $3.74 a gallon. In the east end of my district, it's already well over $4 a gallon, and AAA projects gas prices could reach 50 cents higher per gallon by Memorial Day. The Republican response? Silence. Instead, we will vote today to kill a mortgage assistance program for the struggling homeowners and the recently unemployed. That is why my colleagues, Congressman McNerney, Walz, and McIntyre, and I have joined in introducing the Federal Price Gouging Act to take on this new threat to our economy. Our legislation gives the FTC the authority to investigate, enforce, and then to punish price gouging and market manipulation. I urge my colleagues to join us in standing up to the oil companies and show hardworking Americans that we are in their corner. Vote against the previous question, which, if defeated, would allow the House to consider this important price gouging measure. Now is the time that we must act to prove that their interests are paramount, not the oil companies or the bankers. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Utah.
Reserve.
Gentleman reserved. Gentleman from Colorado.
I'd like to inquire if the gentleman has any remaining speakers.
Apparently not.
Okay, I'm the last speaker from my side. The Mr. Speaker, well, it's been over 2 months, and we've yet to pass a single piece of legislation that promotes job growth in this country. My friends across the aisle repeatedly speak of their mandate to create jobs, and yet instead of listening, the Republicans have focused on bills that will hurt the middle class, disempower the middle class, and in this case, force more Americans into losing their home. The Republicans have been talking about repeal and replace, and yet so far all we've seen is repeal, no replace. It's not as if there aren't many viable alternatives. When we discussed health care reform, there was discussion, well, what do we do with people that have pre-existing conditions? There was an enormous leap of faith with regard to repeal. Oh, we'll get to it someday. Oh, we'll get to it someday. We're hearing the same thing here. It's not as if these viable alternatives, the replace part, are a mystery. In fact, in the 111th Congress, I introduced H.R. 4877, which would have provided a capital gains tax waiver for private investment in community banks, giving local banks sorely needed capital to lend to homeowners who needed to be rescued, to shore up their balance sheets, to encourage primary offerings of equity in the private sector. My bill would allow Americans to invest directly and profit directly from the economic recovery, and I plan shortly to reintroduce this bipartisan bill, and I hope to see an outpouring of support from those who have called for repeal, so that there is a replace component to what we actually do need to do as a country to mitigate the housing crisis and stabilize real estate. Republicans and Democrats alike should be interested in free market alternatives that don't just reduce taxes to revitalize the housing market, but can eliminate them. Mr. Speaker, instead of scrapping this program, we need to have a solid response to the housing crisis in this country. We welcome suggestions from Republicans, independents, all Americans to improve this program, to make it accessible to more families. No program is perfect when it's created, and the FHA refinance program has shown that it can successfully keep families in their homes when given the chance. Our recovery is just beginning and is fragile. We need to provide stability and predictability with regard to the federal policies in this area. This is just another example of a broken promise, a repeal without a replace. And it is leaving what is fundamentally a critical public policy issue, which Democrats and Republicans agree, namely the stabilization of the housing market, without any answer. And even a partially correct answer, Mr. Speaker, is better than no answer. So I hope that the work proceeds to replace, but in the meantime, repealing without knowing what comes next is an enormous leap of faith that could cost too many middle-class families their home, which is why I urge a no vote on the rule. And, Mr. Speaker, if we defeat the previous question, I'll offer an amendment to the rule to provide that immediately after the House adopts this rule, it will bring up H.R. 964, the Federal Price Gouging Prevention Act. This bill, introduced today by my colleague Mr. Bishop of New York, who we just heard from, would crack down on gas price gouging during international crises affecting oil markets, preventing sellers from taking unfair advantages of circumstances with prices that are unconscionably high. Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to insert into the text of the amendment in the record along with the extraneous material immediately prior to the vote on the previous question.
Without objection.
Mr. Speaker, I urge my colleagues to vote no and defeat the previous question so we can take up a bill that will help rather than hurt struggling families. And I urge a no vote on the rule, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Utah.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In closing, I close with some trepidation as I've heard the debate today about continuing resolutions, health programs, teachers, gas prices, and capital gains. But let me risk something and actually talk about the bill at hand. First of all, it's an impeccably good rule, which allows an open amendment process for anyone who wants to think through an amendment and pre-file it. Not a gotcha amendment, but a real amendment to this bill. It's a good way of handling the situation on the floor. I'm very proud of the Rules Committee for presenting this type of a rule. Secondly, you have heard from the sponsor of this piece of legislation the details that are required of this particular program, which discourages those from actually using it. So that the CBO would say that if we continue this program, which is not actually attracting any takers, it would cost the federal government at least $175 million in failed mortgages, defaulted mortgages. In addition, this is one of the programs that we're talking about mandatory spending, not discretionary, but actually doing something about mandatory spending. And in the terms of the Inspector General, this program has failed. We can do better, and as a government we ought to do better than this poorly planned, poorly executed, underutilized, and very, very expensive failed program. With that, Mr. Speaker, I yield back the balance of my time and move the previous question on the resolution.
Question is on ordering the previous question on the resolution. All those in favor say aye. All those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The gentleman from Colorado.
Mr. Speaker, on that I request the yeas and the nays.
The ayes and nays have been requested. Those favoring a vote by the ayes and nays will rise and remain standing until counted. A sufficient number having arisen, the ayes and nays are ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic device. Pursuant to Clause 8 and Clause 9 of Rule 20, this 15-minute vote on ordering the previous question will be followed by 5-minute votes on adoption of House Resolution 150 if ordered, and on agreeing to the Speaker's approval of the journal if ordered. First vote is a 15-minute vote.
The House today beginning initial debate on two bills dealing with homeowner mortgage assistance programs and rescinding or ending those programs. A rule vote coming up on the FHA refinance program, terminating that program. First vote here, though, is a previous question vote and 15-minute vote, first of 3 votes on the House floor. I want to let you know, too, about votes coming up in the U.S. Senate. The Senate will spend up till 3 o'clock this afternoon debating federal spending for fiscal year 2011, which is underway, and how to fund the federal government through the end of the current fiscal year. They, at 3 o'clock, will vote on H.R. 1. That's the spending bill passed by the House in mid-February, and then they will take up the Democratic version if that fails. If both of them fail, the Senate will go back to the negotiation table, back to the bargaining table on FY 2011 spending. The current spending bill runs out Friday, February the 18th. It's being reported this afternoon that Senator Schumer of New York is saying that negotiations to find a compromise would fail unless congressional leaders consider tax increases and cuts to entitlement programs as well. In a speech earlier today, he said, quote, "It's time for a reset. We should approach the talks with fresh eyes and a new mindset." In other congressional news, former Congresswoman Heather Wilson of New Mexico made it official that she will be running for the U.S. Senate in New Mexico. Also, that was earlier this week, but also today, Governor Cuomo of New York has announced a special election date to fill the seat formerly held by Republican Chris Lee, and that special election will be coming up in New York on May the 24th. I mentioned this is the first of 3 votes, a 15-minute vote on the House floor. During this vote, we're going to take you to the White House. President Obama earlier today announced that he is nominating Commerce Secretary Gary Locke to be the new U.S. ambassador to China. The former Washington State governor will be the first Chinese American to hold the ambassadorship if he is approved by the U.S. Senate. The current ambassador to China, former Utah Governor Jon Huntsman, is resigning, and it is possible that he will seek the Republican presidential nomination. Anyway, from earlier today at the White House, the President's comments and Gary Locke, just under 10 minutes.
Good morning, everybody. As many people know, our current ambassador to China, Jon Huntsman, has decided to step down from his current job. During his tenure, Jon has been an outstanding advocate for this administration and for this country. He made a real sacrifice in moving his family out of the state that they loved and has helped to strengthen our critical relationship with the Chinese government and the Chinese people. And so I am very grateful for his service. In replacing Ambassador Huntsman, I can think of nobody who is more qualified than Gary Locke. More than 100 years ago, Gary's grandfather left China on a steamboat bound for America, where he worked as a domestic servant in Washington State. A century later, his grandson will return to China as America's top diplomat. In the years between these milestones, Gary has distinguished himself as one of our nation's most respected and admired public servants. As our country's first Chinese-American governor, he worked tirelessly to attract jobs and businesses to Washington State, and he doubled exports to China. 2 years ago, I asked Gary to continue this work as Commerce Secretary. I wanted him to advocate for America's businesses and American exports all around the world, make progress on our relationship with China, and use the management skills he developed as governor to reform a complex and sprawling agency. He has done all that and more. He's been a point person for my National Export Initiative, and last year Gary's department led a historic number of trade missions that helped promote American businesses and support American jobs. He's overseen an increase in American exports and support American jobs. He's overseen an increase in American exports, and particularly exports to China, a country we recently signed trade deals with that will support 235,000 American jobs. As Commerce Secretary, Gary oversaw a census process that ended on time and under budget, returning $2 billion to American taxpayers. He's earned the trust of business leaders across America by listening to their concerns, making it easier for them to export their goods abroad, and dramatically reducing the time it takes to get a patent. When he's in Beijing, I know that American companies will be able to count on him to represent their interests in front of China's top leaders. As one of the world's fastest growing economies, our relationship with China is one of the most critical of the 21st century. Over the last 2 years, we've worked hard to build a relationship that serves our national interest, addressing global security issues and expanding opportunities for American companies and American workers. Continued cooperation between our countries will be good for America, it will be good for China, and it will be good for the world. As the grandson of a Chinese immigrant who went on to live the American dream, Gary's the right person to continue this cooperation. I know he will bring the same skills and experience that he brought to Commerce Secretary to this new position that he's about to embark on. I want to thank him, and I also want to thank his gorgeous and extraordinary family who's standing here, Mona, Emily, Dylan, and Maddie. It's always tough to move families. Maddie just turned 14 today, so I was commiserating. Emily just turned 14 today, so I was commiserating with her as somebody who moved around a lot when I was a kid as well. I assured her it would be great 10 years from now. Right now it's probably a drag. But I'm absolutely confident that we could not have better representation of the United States of America in this critical relationship than we're going to get from the Locke family. And Gary, I wish you all the best of luck in Beijing. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, thank you very much, Mr. President, and I'm deeply humbled and honored to be chosen as your next ambassador to China. It was a little over a century ago that my grandfather first came to America to work as a houseboy for a family in the state of Washington in exchange for English lessons. And he went back to China, had a family, and so my father was also born in China and came over as a teenager a few years later. He then enlisted in the United States Army just before the outbreak of World War II, became part of that greatest generation, and saw action on the beaches of Normandy and on the march to Berlin, and then came back to Seattle to raise a family and start a small business. My father never imagined that one of his children could ever serve as the Secretary of Commerce in the United States of America, and he was beaming with pride, Mr. President, the day you presided over my swearing-in ceremony. Sadly, Dad passed away this past January, but I know that if he were still alive, it would be one of his proudest moments to see his son named as the United States Ambassador to his ancestral homeland. I'm going back to the birthplace of my grandfather, my father, my mom, and her side of the family.
and I'll be doing so as a devoted and passionate advocate for America, the country where I was born and raised. As Commerce Secretary, I've helped open up foreign markets for American businesses so they can create more jobs right here in America. And I'm eager to continue that work in China and to help you, Mr. President, manage one of America's most critical and complex diplomatic, economic, and strategic relationships. I'm excited to take on this new challenge, as is my wife and our children, to varying degrees among the kids. And we'll be leaving Washington, D.C. with great memories and many new friends. Being Commerce Secretary has been one of the best jobs I've ever had, thanks to the immensely talented and dedicated men and women within the Department of Commerce, in the White House, and within the Cabinet. And I'm proud of the work that we've done at the Commerce Department, delivering services faster, serving the needs of U.S. businesses and workers, saving taxpayers billions of dollars by being more efficient in everything that we do. And I'm confident that these accomplishments will stand the test of time. Mr. President, I'm eager to assume this new position, and it's a privilege and a solemn responsibility to serve you and the American people as the next United States Ambassador to China. Thank you for the confidence and the trust that you've placed in me. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy. Thank you, President. Thank you so much.
Mr. President, will China support a no-fly zone over Libya?
President Obama and Commerce Secretary and U.S. Ambassador to China nominee Gary Locke earlier today at the White House. Live on the House floor, 3 votes here. The first one, a procedural vote. The House has been debating a couple of bills which eliminate home mortgage relief programs. A procedural vote here, 15-minute vote. And the 2 bills, one would end the Housing Administration refinance program for homes valued at less than the mortgage, and they will, if they approve the rule for that, which is next, they will debate the bill tomorrow. And then on Friday, they will continue debating a bill that they passed the rule for earlier, a bill that would kill a program providing mortgage assistance to jobless homeowners. Again, first of 3 votes on the House floor. It's a 15-minute vote. Less than an hour from now, approximately, in the U.S. Senate, they're going to take up a couple of votes on 2011 federal spending. First, a vote on H.R. 1, the House Republican budget plan, and also the Senate Democratic alternative. If both of those fail, they will return to negotiations over spending for fiscal year 2011. Mitch McConnell was on the floor earlier today of the U.S. Senate laying out the Republican position.
The Republican leader.
Later today, senators will have an opportunity to take a position on government spending. At a time when Washington is borrowing about $4 billion a day, Democratic leaders want to cut about $4.5 billion in government spending for the rest of this fiscal year and call it a day. In other words, they want to take what amounts to a day-and-a-half long holiday from their out-of-control spending and then return to the status quo for the rest of the year. Let me just add that paying lip service to the threat caused by the deficit is not a substitute for responsible leadership. And the job-destroying tax hikes on small businesses and American families are not the answer to out-of-control Washington spending. At a time when increasing gas prices are already threatening our economic recovery, a minivan tax that some on the other side have proposed won't solve our nation's fiscal crisis. But I'll tell you what it will do. It will destroy jobs and impose a real burden on families every time they fill up at the pump, at a time when people are looking for relief instead. Democrats' steadfast refusal to cut another dime from the bloated Washington budget has left them no choice but to propose raising taxes on American families and small businesses so they can continue spending at unsustainable levels. Republicans, on the other hand, have made a serious proposal to rein in wasteful spending. To me, at least, the choice before us is pretty clear. But as we approach today's vote, it's worth noting that even if we were to pass the biggest spending cuts that have been proposed so far in this debate, it wouldn't even put a dent in the fiscal problems we face as a result of the growth in entitlement spending. Think about it. Democrats have been waging war this week over a proposal to cut $4.7 billion, Meanwhile, the amount of money we promised to spend on programs like Social Security and Medicare, money we don't have, is about $52 trillion. So this week's debate is just a dress rehearsal for the big stuff. And so far, Democrats are showing they're just not up to it. They either lack the stomach or the courage, and the President, as members of his own party point out, is nowhere to be found on this issue. Now, I've talked about this leadership vacuum repeatedly this week on the entitlements and how their unchecked growth threatens to bury all of us in red ink before we know it. We can argue about whether to cut $5 billion or $60 billion in day-to-day expenses all we want, but the fact is, even if we hit the bigger number, we're still staring at a catastrophe. And the President appears to be totally uninterested in leading us to a bipartisan solution, the way Ronald Reagan and Bill Clinton did the last time we faced crises of this magnitude. But when it comes to another crisis, the jobs crisis, the President isn't just failing to lead, he's flat out barring the door with a mountain of stifling new regulations and calculated inaction on outstanding free trade agreements with Colombia and Panama. This morning, the U.S. Trade Representative is set to testify before the Finance Committee to voice the administration's support of a trade agreement with South Korea. And while we support the administration's position on South Korea, the lack of leadership on these two other countries which signed free trade agreements with us more than 3 years ago is completely disheartening. The reason for inaction is stunning. Union bosses don't want to see them passed. For some reason, they seem to think that expanding the market for U.S. goods into Colombia and Panama somehow hurts them, which is absurd, absolutely absurd, Madam President. The administration has previously expressed tepid support for these deals, an acknowledgement that expanding markets for U.S. goods can only help U.S. workers, and that the picture in Colombia is better than the labor bosses would have us believe. But they've failed to follow through. The irony of union opposition to these trade deals is that an expanded U.S. presence in Latin America can only help the workers there by exporting U.S. business standards and practices. And of course, more exports for U.S. firms mean more jobs for U.S. workers in the United States. In the last few weeks, company after company has come before Congress to testify how important accessing Latin American markets is for the future and to create jobs right here in America. According to the Chamber of Commerce, failing to pass these trade agreements, along with the trade agreement with South Korea, could cost us 380,000 U.S. jobs. While we've dithered on these agreements, Colombia has moved on. Having been stiff-armed by the United States, it's finding other trade partners. Naturally, Colombia has turned to other countries, and worse still, is warming relations with Hugo Chavez in neighboring Venezuela. Last week, Colombian President Juan Manuel Santos was quoted referring to Chavez as his new best friend, a man who just last year accused Santos of plotting to assassinate him. At a time when nearly 14 million Americans are looking for work, the President should be listening to those of us who come to him with ways to create jobs, and this is one of them. The administration has no excuse for failing to act on these trade agreements. It's in the interest of our country to approve them. It would create jobs here at home at a time when we desperately need them. I am confident Congress could pass these on a bipartisan basis today. I urge the administration to act today, and not just on South Korea, but on Colombia and Panama. I, for one, am prepared to do everything in my power to pass these agreements, all of them together, this year. Madam President, I suggest the absence of a quorum.
And look for back-to-back roll call votes in the U.S. Senate, again, on the H.R. 1, the Republican plan passed in the House, and the Democratic alternative. Both of those have a 60-vote threshold to pass, set for 3 o'clock Eastern. Bernie Sanders, who was a guest on Washington Journal this morning, tweets that the Republican House bill that will be voted on today is draconian in terms of the cuts that it is making. Also tweeting this afternoon, Senator Roy Blunt, saying very sad to hear that David Broder passed away today. David was a greatly respected journalist, and I always enjoyed our conversations As you may have heard, David Broder, the Pulitzer Prize-winning columnist for the Washington Post, died today at the age of 81. You can keep track of the tweets and thoughts of some of your members of Congress at cspan.org, at twitter.com/cspan. On the House floor, 3 votes, one of which is the rule for one of the bills that eliminates a federal mortgage assistance program. That's the vote that's coming up next, the rule for that bill. And this is a procedural vote ahead of that, a 15-minute vote. 2 5-minute votes will follow this. But again, getting back to the Senate vote coming up at 3 o'clock this afternoon, we spoke about that this morning on Washington Journal with National Journal's budget reporter Humberto Sanchez.
Humberto Sanchez is joining us on the phone. He is covering the story for the National Journal. Thanks, as always, for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
So set the stage. What's going to happen when the debate and the votes get underway at noon Eastern Time on the Senate floor? Live coverage, we should point out, on C-SPAN 2.
Well, it looks like the Senate Democrats are looking to lay down markers where show that the House passed bill and that their own Democratic alternative neither will be able to win the 60 votes needed, and that a middle path will have to be forged in order to get through this impasse.
So you have $61 billion from the Republican plan, about $6.5 billion for the Democratic plan. How do the two sides meet?
That's the thing. This vote also, Senate Democrats believe, will help push Republicans off of their figure, and hopefully will get them negotiating. Senate Democrats are also calling for a kind of a broader discussion on the issue. These 2 bills only look at current discretionary spending, where Senate Democrats are hoping, at least Senate Majority Whip Dick Durbin said that he hopes if Republicans want serious cuts for the rest of this fiscal year, that they should bring other things to the table, like taxes and other entitlement provisions that they believe could also save the money and cut the deficit.
Meanwhile, front page of Roll Call this morning indicated that House Republicans already beginning work on another extension on that continuing resolution. The first deadline was March the 4th. A 2-week extension passed, so the next deadline is Friday, March 18th. What's happening on the House side?
The House apparently is looking to pass another short-term extension, casting doubt that an agreement on the rest of the fiscal year can be reached before the March 18th deadline. And yesterday, House Majority Whip Kevin McCarthy said, they will continue to chip away. He said that he believes that they could pass another 2, 3, or 4-week extension that would cut roughly $2 billion a week to meet their $61 billion goal. But in response, Senator Harry Reid said he's personally opposed to another short-term extension. And he thinks really there's no long-term because there's only about 6 months left in the fiscal year.
We're talking with Humberto Sanchez. He writes for the National Journal. Another headline on this Wednesday morning is from Politico, the Senate showdown on budget votes, and a reference to Senator Joe Manchin, former West Virginia governor, now senator from that state. He's a Democrat. He had this to say on the Senate floor.
The more important question is this: why are we engaging in this political theater? Why are we voting on partisan proposals that we know will fail, that we know don't balance our nation's priorities with the need to get our fiscal house in order? Why are we doing all this when the most powerful person in these negotiations, our president, has failed to lead this debate or offer a serious proposal for spending and cuts that he would be willing to fight for?
Humberto Sanchez, the president was in Boston yesterday talking about education, essentially saying that he's open to budget cuts but doesn't want to see significant cuts in education, calling that a failed economic policy. So again, let's go back to where are the markers, where will the lines be drawn?
Part of our conversation this morning on Washington Journal with Humberto Sanchez of National Journal, talking about the vote coming up in the U.S. Senate about 3 o'clock this afternoon. The votes, a pair of them, on the Republican budget plan, the spending plan passed in mid-February, and the Democratic alternative. Live coverage of the House here on C-SPAN, the first of 3 votes.
On this question, the yeas are 235, the nays are 186. The previous question is ordered. Question is on the adoption of the resolution. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. Opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Gentleman from Colorado. Recorded vote has been requested. Those in favor of taking this vote by a recorded vote will rise and remain standing to be counted. A sufficient number having arisen, a recorded vote is ordered. Members will record their vote by electronic device. This will be a 5-minute vote, followed by another 5-minute vote. This vote on passage of the resolution.
The first and only recorded votes on the House floor this afternoon. This is the rule for a bill that would kill the Federal Housing Administration refinance program. If the rule passes, they will debate it tomorrow, and then into Friday they will continue debate on home mortgage assistance on a bill that would kill a program providing mortgage assistance to jobless homeowners. That bill would come up on Friday. But again, this is the rule for the FHA bill, and a bill that would eliminate that program. 5-minute vote on the House floor.
On this question, the yeas are 240, the nays are 180. The resolution is adopted without objection. The motion to reconsider is laid upon the table. House will be in order. House will be in order. House will be in order. The chair would ask members to take seats. Chair would ask members to clear the aisle. I'm going to do a moment of silence here.